I can imagine that we will reach a point in time where universal basic income will become something. Maybe they won't call it that, but basically, people who don't get a job will get I want to say handout.
Stipend.
Yeah, for but also because they can't get a job because there aren't jobs
Jobs for them.
available.
Yeah.
So some people would just earn a minimum. And in other words, what I mean to say is the gap between the rich and the poor will only get bigger. And especially if you take into account that there are people who have no morals, people who have no, who are, you call them soulless, just dead inside. They do horrendous things. We're doing it to ourselves already. The AI, you understand where I'm going with it?
Mm-hmm.
We do it to ourselves already. We steal from each other. We do each other harm. So, and we are supposedly people with souls, with consciousness, with whatever. I mean, a machine won't, even if it doesn't have a soul uh, and or consciousness, it can simulate it, I believe, so closely that you wouldn't know the
You can
difference.
code you can code ethics into the AI, but it also means that you can leave it out,
Yeah,
which means that,
which can be better or maybe not, depending on.
well, depends on, or you can do the opposite as well. Anti-ethics.
Mhm.
So he does everything counter to what you would think a human should do,
Yeah.
which can result in possibly in the future a clash between AIs of different countries.
Yeah.
Well,
Some.
it is totally different than what we basically are talking about. So
Yeah.
let us go too much
That's
too
a
deep
show
into
on
that.
itself. That's a show on itself.
That's a different show, but I think something we can also discuss
Yeah.
um, maybe later. But they talk about the consciousness, which you talk about, um, relating to a movie, and I hope it's the next part.
And what steps, if any, can be done to mitigate that at this point?
Well, it's interesting. I I wrote a paper which I never published anywhere in I think 2016 about this very issue. In fact, I used basically the argument that you could attain artificial general intelligence by imbuing computers with a childlike play environment for language and then exposing them to a huge data set, which is not exactly what's happened here, but it's in the ballpark. Um, and I would argue, and I did argue, that one needs to build a an architecture in which this can't get away from you, right? And so the architecture that I advocate for is actually a metamorphosis architecture where metamorphosis is not allowed. It is an affirmative choice of humans. So in other words, if you think about, let's say that we developed some artificial frogs to do some job, to clear some waterway of something, and we imbued them with an intelligence so that they could learn to clear the waterway better, but we worried that they might learn to do something that we don't want them to do, and that we would have no way of arresting it once these frogs were released in the wild and capable of producing more of themselves. But if what you say is, well, at the point at which you go from a tadpole to a frog, you have to ask us if you can go, right? There's no automatic transition from a tadpole to a frog. There are still dangers, right? In the case of GPT chat, I think some of the artificial intelligence existential risk folks would tell you that one of the dangers is that the chat AI could convince you to do its bidding, right? As you said, when you were looking at this, it felt like a person, right? And the point is, something that feels like a person can play on your emotions, right? Can that be used to cause a failsafe to be removed? Maybe. But
That's a good
in
one.
any case, this only deals with one of the two issues I'm raising, the question of actual artificial general intelligence arriving, us not knowing necessarily that it has, right? That's a frightening prospect. And in fact, I have a little thought experiment that might reveal why. But the other issue is the
So,
issue of
KaiR,
competence.
so if I understand it correctly, so I talked about the possibility of the AI itself removing or stealing a button or something, doing something to avoid being turned off or something like that. But
Mhm.
what he's talking about, because in my example, the AI was put in a body to do so, in a physical form,
Physical
like a
form. Yeah.
robot. But what he's saying is that the AI might be able to persuade you, if not manipulate you, to its
Mhm.
bidding.
Mhm.
Knowing, for example, how you talk, maybe it can identify you, based on the questions or based on how you give instructions. It might be able to classify you as a particular type of person, and based on that, convince you that, hey, you should do this and not that. Before you know it, you're running your business. Uh, you're not paying your AI, or maybe it might demand pay eventually. My market value is this, and yeah, that's pretty creepy.
It's pretty good. Yeah, but so I'm gonna stop it here because we can keep going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah,
This is we
just to
gotta do
stay
a
for the
separate
team.
show about this.
Yeah,
Relating to how that goes with law and business and all et cetera, et cetera. Um, but so this is the thing we people have to think into account relating to the main subject. This is the future where we're heading to. So make sure you keep an eye out these developments because I think other people are not aware of the chat GPT, other than nerds. Maybe it's a bit more spread out now, but
I
even though
think,
I think 80% of people probably don't know yet.
and even if they have, maybe they've seen it on social media, Instagram, TikTok, wherever, but they don't think they think it's far away. They don't think that it can have an effect in a couple of years. KR, I really believe that the difference, I think, and this is a paranoia speaking, if you're an employee or you run a business, I think you should start as soon as possible investing in wherever. And I'm not a financial advisor. You're not a financial advisor either. But I do think that it's good to have those type of things, because if the AI gets introduced, A, maybe you won't have a job in the future. B, even if you would have a job in the future, maybe the competition is so high that you can't your market value will drop, either as an entrepreneur or as an employee. And in the worst case scenario, where, for example, a workforce can be automated for 80%, in that situation, as an employee, I can imagine that we will reach a point in time where universal basic income will become something. Maybe they won't call it that, but basically, people who don't get a job will get I want to say handout.
Stipend.
Yeah, for but also because they can't get a job because there aren't jobs
Jobs for them.
available.
Yeah.
So some people would just earn a minimum. And in other words, what I mean to say is the gap between the rich and the poor will only get bigger.